Throwing 100 miles an hour seems like it's unattainable for most of us. It seems like it's only for those who are genetically gifted and those physical beasts. But today, I sat down with one of the coaches at the Pitch Lab who has trained multiple guys to throw 100 miles an hour and what it really took for them to get to 100. These guys started anywhere from the low 90s to the upper 90s. And he's gonna break down the two guys that he was able to directly train to get from the low 90s to 100 and the other one to go from the mid 90s to 100. And so if you're a higher level pitcher, or even if you're not at that level just yet, this is going to be extremely valuable in order to understand what it really takes to throw 100 miles an hour. And you might be surprised as to what type of changes they made in order for them to throw 100. If you're new here, my name is Josh Gessner. All we talk about on this channel is throwing 95 miles an hour and beyond, because if you want to play at the Division 1 or professional level these days, you need to be throwing 95 or pretty close to that. Again, no guarantees. I only share what I learned throwing in the mid 90s and beyond, and what has worked for our athletes who throw 95 and beyond. So let's get straight into the video. All right, so today we've got Tanner, and today I quickly wanted to talk to you, Tanner, about what it really takes to throw 100 and what you've seen, if there are any commonalities with guys who actually get to 100, because you've trained like a couple guys to throw 100, right?
Yeah. I've trained a few guys that had never hit 100 before, and then was able to train them until, they hit that 100-mile-an-hour mark.
Yeah, so like when you get a guy who's already at such a high level, right? Like, throwing maybe mid 90s, and you're trying to get him to throw 100, which is like extremely elite. Like, what's your thought process there? Like, how do you go about that training process with those guys?
So with those guys, right, they're already mid 90s. They're moving well for the most part. They're doing things from a force production standpoint that's, at an elite level to be mid 90s already, right? So it's kind of leaning into, what they do well and making sure they try to create like an outlier situation. So with one of the guys that I trained to throw 100, a little bit of timing was off to where when we did biomechanics analysis of him, his timing of his peak pelvis was just a hair late. And he wasn't getting his pelvis to that like 45-degree cleared point when his front foot hit. So he was missing a little bit of energy just from a timing standpoint, because by the time the ball released out of his hand, that energy was still being transferred up. It hadn't fully transferred everything from the ground. So with him, it was a timing thing. And to be completely honest with you, he actually had to pull his hamstring in the middle of his off season, and we continued working on this timing with his lower half, and that's what really got him. But it's very, very minute details, and it takes very, very focused work every single throw to do that. And credit to him, he put in the work, threw a hamstring pull, and went to some pro days and got signed and hit 100.
That's awesome. Wait, so yeah, obviously it's gonna be like minute details, and so like, can you see that through a video, or do you need like a mocap or something?
So obviously a motion capture is gonna help with in terms of timing of force. With my other guy that hit 100, he was a guy who was super good mobility, super good positions, but he wasn't using all of his mobility in his upper half, if that makes sense. What we tried to do was he got into really good positions. He was 96 to 97, touching 98. But what we really tried to do was he was using his range of motion. He's using his upper body mobility that he has. But his timing, again, same thing. What it really comes down to, a lot of it is timing. These guys move well and produce enough force. It's just increasing that efficiency a little bit. So for him, it was, instead of being, a little more linear with his upper half and then rotating a little bit early and kind of being a little bit less closed at foot plant, what we did was try to create a situation where we create a little bit more counter rotation with his glove side. And what it did was ended up putting his upper body in a position to be able to apply force for a longer period of time from the time foot plant hit to ball release. So for him, it was creating a little bit more time to apply force to the ball. With the first guy, it was more so transferring more energy from the lower half into his upper half, because his upper half was already really clean.
That's so interesting. And so like, we do remote training, right? And so when you don't have a motion capture like that, and you get a guy who's pretty high level like that, like how do you see these like minute things?
Obviously learning from the guys that I got mentored by in this standpoint, but like with the second guy who I didn't have motion capture, It's a very, very deep dive. I need to see side view, front view, as best video we possibly can, and then kind of taking the principles that I try to take it as like a motion capture in my head of like what based on how you move. I don't need to think of a new way for you to move. I need to think of like little tiny pieces that I can pull on that's going to give you either a little bit more range or apply a little bit more force. I need to find the best version of your mechanics versus, trying to overhaul you. Because if you're mid 90s, you're already moving well. We need to just make those outlier things outlier to get you to 100 and maximize it. And that's where from a visualization standpoint for myself, it's like I need to try to see how they need to move before they do it and identify those small things, whether it's upper body, lower body. There's obviously principles, but everybody's gonna move a little bit different. But I need to be able to see where they need to get to in my head mechanically to get to 100, and then explain it to them and you make them understand why so that they can buy into it and I'm not just giving them a blind assessment. But when we have that relationship to where they understand what they need to do, I can kind of see in my head what they need to look like. That real coach athlete relationship and buy-in is more important than any training program you could ever put together. That buy-in is what really gets guys to that level.
Okay. No, that's awesome. So, do you feel like with a guy who's already at a high level, like we talked about, mid 90s, like would you say that mechanics is pretty much king in terms of like doing that, or was there stuff in the weight room as well?
I think this is how I kind of look at it. I don't think it's necessarily one or the other. I think ultimately, obviously, what we need to do is improve the throw and improve him on the mound. But I'm a big believer in that the mechanical changes on guys at that level, for the most part, they don't need to get stronger. They don't need to get bigger and put on muscle mass. It's very rare that that's the case of a guy that's mid 90s. But what I found works the most is that if we're working on something on the mound mechanically, there needs to be tailored exercises and a lifting program that very much favors that mechanical adaptation. Because for the most part, for those guys, it's not just going to be a cue and go and it's going to work. The body isn't getting into that position for a reason. And attacking it from a weight room and mobility standpoint, a strength standpoint, strength through length, through end ranges, creating more end range. We actually have to drive an adaptation outside of throwing to make sure that the mechanical change is also going to be made. So they almost work coincided. And that's where, being able to, talking about remote training, being able to be in control of the throwing and the lifting is so important because when you're getting your lifting program from somebody that doesn't know what you're working on throwing wise, in their head, if them doing their job is you getting stronger, you getting more explosive and feeling better. When that's not necessarily the goal. The goal is to drive the adaptations that we're trying to change in the throw. And if you can do that with a very high level of focus and intent, that's what those guys did to get to 100. They weren't chasing weight room numbers. They weren't chasing more. They were chasing the adaptations they needed to get to 100.
Now, before we keep going, if you want help from us to gain pitching velocity to get to the next level, you can book a call with me down below or just send me a message on Instagram and I'll get back to you. Could we go a little bit more like specific in terms of like, how you made these changes for someone like, the first guy, which was pelvis, right? Like what kind of stuff did you actually do in more nitty gritty detail from the throwing and weight room?
So from throwing standpoint, when we began the offseason, what I did was I put him in a position to, this was my approach with him. I want him to feel what it feels like when his lower half's in the right position when his front foot hits. So for him, I put him through a lot of staggered stance, roll-in type things, stationary roll-ins and walking roll-ins, and very, very, very strict with his lower half. A lot of guys will get sloppy and turn and then go with their roll-ins. His was very strict, and a lot of it was stationary to start so that he could feel what it felt like when his front foot hit and his pelvis was in the right position. So from that standpoint, we hammered that for weeks and weeks and weeks. I needed him to understand what what felt right. Right? Everybody talks about these feelings and this, and if you've never felt it, you don't know what's right or wrong. But if I can put him in that position and say, this is what it needs to feel like when we get things right through your delivery, obviously, and we're obviously in a constrained stationary position, this is what it needs to feel like in your delivery. We hammered that for weeks and weeks and weeks. His velo started climbing because he was like, oh, like I actually feel good. Like this feels right now. Once I created that buy-in and understanding from him and he knew that's what he needed to do, that's the other part of it. Like if you can't prove to an athlete that this is gonna work or like this is what they need to do, it's hard for them to make that change too because they don't fully believe in it. And that's what I needed to get from him was that full belief. And then from there worked into walking roll-ins and then slowly maneuvering it to his delivery. We use step backs to try to get his lower half engaged and more active than just a stationary leg lift out of the stretch. But more for the reason that I just wanted to make sure that his back leg was being dynamic to make sure that it was rotating on time because it was late. But we'd alternate. We'd go stationary roll in, wind up, stationary roll in, step back, stationary roll in, step back to make sure that what he felt on that stationary roll in was exactly what he felt on his step back and his wind up. And then, like I said, he was a guy that was stuck for a long time at 92, 95, and then he threw his bullpen. He sat like 98, 99 in a pro day. It was sick.
That was
So
sick.
that's the approach I took with that athlete.
So a quick question on that, like, when you talk about buy-in, right? I feel like that's really difficult with an athlete of that level. How do you create that buy-in when it's like we don't really know if this is going to work, right?
Right.
Like it's kind of like uncharted territory, and so how do you approach that?
For sure. And I think the biggest part that um, everybody forgets about in this day and age of technology and stuff is like if you're in the trenches with your athlete and you prove to them that you care about their goals, and you're give them the feeling at least. Like I understand that the athlete's always going to be the one that cares more about their goals, but if you can give them that feeling and truly show that you care about them and you're in it with them, that's kind of the first step of buy-in. I think that at the end of the day, coaching, like athletes need to feel like you care about them and you actually want them to get better, not just they're not just another athlete that you're training. So that was the big thing was, hey man, like I'm gonna try to get you in pro days, like we're gonna get signed, like come on man, like I got you, like I got your back. That was a huge part of it, and that created a trust level to where, and I also explained everything. This is why we need to do this. This is what you did in the past. This is what high level guys do, and showing some examples of big leaguers that throw that hard as well is an easier way to explain the mechanical change. And then it's kind of one of those things where I didn't know with the Roland if he would like it or not. Obviously, fortunately, it did. I mean, I knew it was going to put him in the right positions, but fortunately, he felt it and it felt good. And his velo was jumping out of just that constraint and drill to where that buy-in just slowly began to climb and trust. And did we have rough weeks where he didn't move well and he didn't throw it? Of course. But it was just a reminder of that buy-in from the get-go, like, hey man, like we got this. Like I'm in this with you. We're gonna get there. That's what I think creates the most buy-in and trust, even when things aren't good, because we all know velocity is not a linear curve. It does go up and down. But if an athlete knows that you care and you're putting in all the effort you can, giving them all the knowledge that you can provide, and you show that you care and you're there for them, no matter if they're PRing or having the worst week of their life. I think that's super important to create buy-in beyond baseball, beyond your actual expertise and what programming you're giving to them. You need to have that trust level and care factor.
I'm curious, when you were making this mechanical change, right? Was it completely off the mound, or was it like drills and then you would test it off the mound, or how do you do that?
So it was kind of a blend. At the beginning of the offseason, we stayed on flat ground. Very stationary role and simplified it all of his catch play. He did pull his hamstring early in the offseason, so we were kind of
Yeah.
limited. And it was a lot of lower mid intent work because of his hamstring. But then what we did was we'd slowly blend his catch play. His catch play would then slowly blend to the mound, half and half, flat ground and mound. And then slowly his drill work would be more on the mound. And then slowly it would be like, all right, flat ground is just to get loose, and then let's get on the mound and get our work in. Using like a screen pretty up close to him was a super helpful way to do that because it allowed him to just focus on how he was moving versus if he was throwing at the guy's chest or wherever. Because at the end of the day, we just needed to drive that mechanical change, right? Um, that's the biggest thing that we need to do. And I didn't want him thinking about anything else at that point because we knew that that's what we had to do to get to 100. And I only wanted him to focus on that.
That's sick. Anything on the weight room with driving this mechanical change, or?
I wouldn't say anything crazy in the weight room. We did do, our rotational exercise and our rotational lifts to where, he's feeling that feeling. And I think, you know, keep the main thing the main thing. I think nothing's going to be um, perfect in sense of like perfectly transferable and specialized in specific training. But working on rotation and stuff like that, those changes I started to see on like the rotational Kaisers and his med ball work. I started to see his lower half starting to feel like that, and he could feel it, and those numbers consequently did go up. That wasn't what we were chasing, but we did start to see those changes in his med ball work, rotational work, and all that kind of stuff.
Hell yeah. Well, cool. So how about the The other guy, if we were to go into a little bit more detail, was he more of a weight room guy?
So the other guy was very gymnastics background, very elastic, but he's a guy who, looks super smooth when like that DeGrom S style. He's not like that electric boom, arm explodes, right? He was more of that deep range of motion, get really good pull on the ball for a long time, get into some gross, very good positions, um, and just was able to apply force for a long period of time from his arm standpoint and his lower half. Lower half timing was great. Arm timing was perfect. Really good layback, clean planar rotation, um, super clean on that sense. But like I kind of talked about a little bit earlier was, he was kind of a mid lower slot guy, and he was coming in very linear. And because I knew that he was a guy that benefited from, pull like getting a longer pull, quote unquote, or applying force for a longer period of time, what we played with was kind of like I said, a little bit more counter rotation because I knew he had the range of motion to do it. Play with a little bit more counter rotation so that when his front foot landed, he could apply force for just a split second longer with his spine to then lead into his arm that he already did so well. That's why he was mid upper 90s already. But that was the biggest focus that whole offseason. And he went to spring training and it was his third live at bats and he was 100. It was sick.
That's
Like I
awesome.
said, very minute details. His lower half was elite. His upper half was elite. His strength was very good. I knew from his weight room stuff that he did like to apply force for a long period of time, super deep into jumps, and took him a little bit. He wasn't that super like explosive electric athlete. But from then it was like, okay, where can we find a place in his delivery to give him a little bit more time to apply force for a little bit longer? And that was in his torso positioning at foot plant. And like I said, that's where you know, his average heater went from 96.5, 97 to 99. It was sick.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Did you do any? I know you talked a little bit about like the strength through length stuff. Like when
Mhm.
you did you do any of that stuff with him, or he was just
Um, yes, we did. We did a lot of mobility. Like he was already a pretty hypermobile guy, so just making sure that his exercises were getting to end range and making sure that we were hammering some of that upper body stuff, using some isometrics at end ranges just to make sure that we're um, getting exactly what he needs. But for him too, it was a lot of like thought process. Like I gotta put myself in these positions, make sure we're strengthening his spine and his T spine to where not only did he have the range, but he was able to control and be strong through it. Because that's what made him special. He can apply force for a long period of time, and that's how he produces the most force. So being strong and being hypermobile, there's that responsibility to make sure that you're also strong and stable in those end ranges, or else you're going to be in not so good positions. Either you're not going to throw hard, or it's going to be one of those things where you can be more at risk for injury as well.
so if you're still here, you're probably a guy who needs to gain pitching velocity to get to the next level. You can't be throwing in the low to mid 80s anymore. You have to be throwing 90 miles an hour and beyond. So if you want to help, again, you can book a call with me down below. We'll talk about your situation, see how we might be able to help you. Or if you don't want to book a call, you can just send me a message on Instagram and we can talk about your situation and how you might be able to gain pitching velocity.